We started the season off hot, guys. Two of our top three defenses finished inside the top 10 in total fantasy points pending Monday Night Football. The Los Angeles Rams tied for third on the week, and the Washington Commanders tied for eighth on the week. We did have a miss in the New York Jets, who finished tied for 17th. We can't hit them all, but 2 out of 3 finishing inside the top 10, 25% owned or less is a very, very nice accomplishment for week one. We're turning the page and looking ahead at week two right here on the Faceoff Sports Network. What's going on, guys? So to start this video, I just want to remind people we do 25% owned or less. We pick 3 streamers, and then at the end of the video, we're going to go ahead and show our final rankings for the week. Those rankings do get adjusted during the week. We do it on our Discord. I'll also put them up on Twitter, as well as I'll post them to YouTube. And any changes or comments, drop them in the video below. The rankings, you'll be able to see the streamers compared to where they are in the total rankings on the week. Let's jump into it. Our first defense that we have is the Los Angeles Rams. Yes, we are running it back with the Los Angeles Rams. If you remember last week, I talked about the Los Angeles Rams and said it's a little bit of a risky matchup, right? They ended up finishing tied for third on week one. It was a little bit of a risky matchup because it's still a talented offense in the Texans, but the thought was if we could get them last week, you wouldn't even have to worry about having to pick them up this week because they have a really, really good matchups. They take on the Titans this week, still only 23% owned across fantasy formats. So if you missed out on them last week, there's a good chance that they are still available in your fantasy football leagues this week. They take on the Titans, right? Rookie quarterback in Cam Ward. It's a 41.5% total. And I would say that that's probably heavily favored on the Rams side. The team total didn't come out just yet, but this isn't a away team, but we do get a very, very low point total here, a rookie quarterback. And when we look at this, both of these teams from last week, the Rams defense played fantastic, right? 6th in EPA against the pass, 19th in APA against the rush, right? So not what we wanted to see in terms of that, but they still held, the Texans to under 270 yards, right? That was 9th in the NFL for week one, 7th in quarterback pressure percentage, which is what we were expecting last week, 41.2% quarterback pressure percentage. I expect them to get pressure on the quarterback this week. They held the Texans, a talented offense, to 0 touchdowns in week one. Extremely, extremely impressive. And now they're taking on rookie quarterback Cam Ward, who had some lowlights last week against Denver, but also had some really, really nice moments as well. His offense did not really help him out with a ton of drops. He also made some mistakes there, and the moment did get a little bit too big for him in the second half when the pressure really started to tick up on him, but he looked comfortable to start. When we look at this Titans team, they only mustered 133 yards against Denver in week one. And don't get me wrong, this Texans defense is talented. They are not nearly as talented as the Denver Broncos, but it's still a really, really good spot for them, right? Denver is a great defense, but I mean, ultimately, the Titans are going to have some growing pains, right? And so while you look at this Rams defense, they're likely going to put on the pressure on a rookie quarterback in Cam Ward. Looking at it, as I said, Titans scored 0 touchdowns in week one, right? And so the Rams gave up 0 touchdowns in week one. So a nice trend there. It's only 1 week. We don't want to overreact, but I liked what I saw from the Rams, and the Titans still have a little bit to grow. Overall, the Rams coverage was also very good in week one. The Titans are going to have success on the ground, which is where the Rams slightly struggled, giving up 113 yards in week one. But ultimately, I think, even if they are running the football, we should get a really, really solid floor here because I don't expect the Titans to put up a lot of points. And we could get some really, really high ceiling here too. This is my number one defense to stream on the week. I really, really like this spot for the Rams. Let's move over to our next defense to stream. It's going to be the Dallas Cowboys. And this is a defense that I was kind of low going into the season on, right? I was not in love with the Dallas Cowboys. They take on the New York Giants, though. 5% rostered across fantasy formats. It's a 44.5% total. So not a very high point total either in this one. We also get a home team. And I would bet that when the totals come out for the teams, the Cowboys probably have a pretty solid margin or a wide gap in terms of their total points compared to the New York Giants, who struggled a ton last week. And when we look at this matchup, Giants were an absolute disaster in week one. Fifth worst EPA per play on offense. Only one out of only three teams in week one didn't score a touchdown. The New York Giants were one of them. And I think ultimately they made a Commanders defense who we were on last week. They made an average Commanders defense look really, really good. And so I just, this is an offense to target right now, as long as Russell Wilson is the quarterback back there. The Giants gave up the second most pressures in week one with 22, and fourth in pressure percentage as well. So top 5 in both marks there. Andrew Thomas, his status is still up in the air. We do not know if he's going to start. He did miss week one, and maybe he'll gut it out and try to give it a go in week 2. But I'm going to operate as if he is not available for the New York Giants. And even if he is, I still think this is a good spot for Dallas. Dallas really, really impressed me on the defensive side of the ball against a tough matchup with the Eagles last week. 42% pressure rate against one of the best offensive lines in football. That was top 10 in total pressure rate. Russell Wilson averaged 3.2 sacks per season last year, or the 3.2 sacks per game over the last 3 seasons. He only took 2 sacks in week one. I expect that to get back to 3 this week against the Dallas Cowboys defense, who against a great offensive line applied a ton of pressure last week, even without Micah Parsons, who's no longer with the team. The key to this game for the Cowboys is just going to be to contain Malik Neighbors and not get sliced up on the ground here. But I'm not expecting it, right? Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scatterboo, they were really abysmal last week. And I think a lot of it had to do with Russell Wilson just not being able to push the ball down the field, right? And defenses were daring them to throw it, or at least the Commanders were daring them to throw it. And they just couldn't really muster much of anything on the ground. So I like the spot here for this defense and the Cowboys. Let's move on to our third defense to stream this week. It's going to be the Seattle Seahawks, who go on the road to the Pittsburgh Steelers. 24% owned. It's a 40.5 total. So another really low total for the Steelers back-to-back weeks. Now it is an away team. It's a low point total. And look, I get it. The Steelers absolutely burned us last week when we talked about the Jets and them being a defense to stream. There is a reason that they're my number 3 defense this week, because there is a possibility that the Steelers offense is for real, right? That is very, very possible. But what I would say in digging into the numbers, there were some things I came across and uncovered in this matchup that I liked. Let's also just note Rodgers, 4 touchdowns for over 250 yards last week, but they also struggled to run the football, right? The Steelers ran for just 53 yards in week one. And it's a tough run defense in Seattle. Seattle, 7th best in EPA per rush allowed in week one. And that was against Christian McCaffrey, who the stats looked good for Christian McCaffrey overall, especially in fantasy. But Seattle EPA on the ground from a defensive perspective, we're still top 10, which is still very impressive. And this is a bad rushing offense, at least to start the season. Did not have a strong start to the year. Steelers, though, Seattle's defense dominated a San Francisco offense that was much better than what they're going to be going against in week 2 here against the Steelers, in my opinion. Seattle edged out the Denver Broncos to be the number 1 defense when it came to pressure percentage. 60% pressure percentage was number 1. Denver was number 2, and they had 10% more in terms of total pressure. More than half of the passing plays, they generated pressure. That pass rush in Seattle looks legit. And that's a defense that should be very, very much improved in year 2 under Mike McDaniel or Mike McDonald. But ultimately, if you look at this offense for the Steelers, right, they honestly were really good at protecting, Aaron Rodgers, 7th best at limiting pressure. But when we look deeper here, Rodgers was still sacked 4 times. 4 times, right? They were one of the best units when it came to not get allowing pressure to the quarterback last week, and Rodgers still took 4 sacks. To me, that signifies that, hey, Rodgers, if he gets pressured, there's a very, very good chance that if it's a good pass rush, they're going to get home on him quite a bit. And so if we can get 3 to 4 sacks here, we get a solid floor plus a low point total, it could give us a really, really strong week. Ultimately, Seattle could be the most talented defense out of all these 3 defenses we've given up. Ultimately, I think the Rams are the best play on the week out of these 3. I think Dallas is playing possibly the worst offense. You could say the Giants are the worst too, possibly. I would probably say the Giants are a little bit better than the Titans because they have bigger playmakers. But ultimately, Seattle's still a good play too. I know Rodgers looked good last week. I know there could be some skepticism because of what they did to the Jets, and they were one of our streamers last week. But the underlying numbers to me says that they could give us a decent amount of sacks, and as long as the Steelers don't put up gaudy numbers and score a ton of touchdowns, this could pay off for us. And ultimately, lowest point total on the week, right? I wasn't expecting them to score, the second highest amount of points. They were on track to be the highest until that crazy game with Buffalo and the Ravens. So ultimately, I like the play in Seattle this week. But that's going to do it for the streamers. Let's go ahead and move over to the rankings for the week. One here, Denver Broncos leading this one off. They take on the Indianapolis Colts. It's a 42.5 point total in this one. Denver, 50% pressure rate against Cam Ward and the Titans last week. I expect Denver to pick up where they left off in week 1 against the Colts here. Daniel Jones looked really good, but it was against a very, very poor Dolphins defense. I'm expecting Denver, who has the best defense in the NFL, to look really formidable here. The only concern I have is really Jonathan Taylor and that run game against Denver if Trey Greenlaw is not going to be able to give it a go. But I have Denver here at number 1. I feel really, really comfortable about this play. They're my number 1 defense this week. Then you have the Los Angeles Rams here at number 2. Los Angeles Rams, in week 1 against CJ Stroud looked really, really good. They take on a Titans team that, we just saw what Denver did to them, a young quarterback in Cam Ward, who I think looked good to start the game. But as the game progressed and the pressure kind of ticked up a little bit, he had some issues there. So Rams 41.6% pressure rate in week 1, looked really, really good in that outing. Then we move over here to number 3. You have the Minnesota Vikings. Vikings take on, a Falcons team that, does not have their starting blindside tackle. This is a defense that brings a ton of simulated pressures with Flores. I think that defense is going to be ready to go against a young quarterback in Michael Penix. I think they're going to give them some issues there. And I think ultimately, some turnovers should be in play, some sacks. And so I'm excited to see the Vikings take on the Falcons in that matchup. Moving on to tier 2, we have the San Francisco 49ers here. 49ers take on the Saints, right? And the Saints, we were all expecting, to look awful against the Cardinals. While I didn't think they looked great, they looked better than many expected. And that's probably more to do with the Cardinals just being a disappointment than anything else. 49ers take on the Saints here, and the 49ers defense looked good last week, against this, against Seattle, 34.3 pressure rate percentage for the 49ers. I think they match up pretty well in this one against a Saints offense that, look, they have some pieces here and there, but ultimately I think San Francisco, going and going to be home in this one is massive for them. It's a 43.5 point total, and I think that's mainly being swung towards the 49ers in this one. Baltimore Ravens here at number 5. Ravens take on the Browns. They are on the road in this one. 45.5% point total in this one. 25% pressure rate against, the Bills is what the Ravens gave us in week 1. But let's be honest, the Bills and Josh Allen are so good at manipulating the pocket, not getting much pressure on him. And so I'm not overly concerned that the Ravens defense did not play lights out against one of, if not the best offenses in the entire NFL with the Buffalo Bills. Moving on to number 6 here, you have the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas takes on the Giants, and I was very adamant. I was not high on this Cowboys defense. They looked good last week. No Micah Parsons against a very formidable Philadelphia Eagles offense. Cowboys with a 43.2% pressure rate last week was one of the higher rates in the NFL. They take on a Giants team. We talked about it before. Is it going to be Russell Wilson? He's going to be benched. I think he's going to give Russ another week here. And ultimately, I like the opportunity for Dallas here. They are going on the road, but I think Dallas is going to match up well in this one. Then we move over to the Seattle Seahawks, and Seattle is another streamer of mine. You obviously saw Dallas. Now you see Seattle. Both streamers back to back here. And I like Seattle in this one. We don't have to talk too much about it because I did mention and did dive pretty deep into them earlier on in the show here. But 60% pressure rate. I think ultimately they can get after Aaron Rodgers, who didn't really have a lot of pressure on him, but when he was pressured, he gave up a lot of sacks. Moving over to the same game here, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who was number one defense last week, let us down tremendously. Was rather surprised in this one, but it's still a very low point total, right? We get 40 points on the total here, the Pittsburgh Steelers in this matchup. And I like the Steelers to bounce back and rebound here. They are home against Seattle in this one. And so I think the Steelers here at 8, not too high, not too low. I'm not going to overreact to, a bad week that they had in week 1 on the road. They are going to be at home, which I think is a nice favorable matchup here for them. Then you move over to the Philadelphia Eagles, and look, the Philadelphia Eagles, no Jalen Carter last week. Dallas looked pretty good against them on offense. While it didn't translate to fantasy points for a lot of those pieces on that team, overall, I do like the Philadelphia's defense, but the Philadelphia Eagles defense, they take on the Kansas City Chiefs. But ultimately, I couldn't put them much higher because even with the Chiefs missing Xavier Worthy, the Chiefs still find ways to move the football down the field and score points. And I think the Chiefs are going to be pretty pissed off after losing last week in that matchup against the Chargers. Philadelphia does travel on the road in this one too, which I don't love, going into a hostile environment. And we'll see if Jalen Carter is going to suit up for that one or not. I'm thinking he's going to. I don't think he'll get suspended, but you might be watching this video and we might already have the news at that point. Green Bay Packers here at 10, and I'm not going to lie, guys, I struggled with Green Bay. I wanted to put them lower. I wanted to put them higher. I went back and forth with them, and it was a really, really tough pick for me here. They do take on the Commanders. It's Thursday Night Football, a pretty high point total here. 48 points is the total. You have Green Bay, who is going to be at home here against Washington. And, Jaden Daniels, he's obviously one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. But what I would say is that I think Micah Parsons can give this offensive line some trouble. Connerly, the right tackle, had a tough start from what I saw for his first game as a rookie. So I think there's a possibility Micah Parsons could really, really wreak havoc in this game and give them some trouble. And while the point total might not be in our favor here, Commanders might score points. I think we might get a decent amount of sacks, maybe a turnover or two. And it's just one of the best defenses in the NFL. So I can't really put them outside of the top 12, even if it's a tough matchup here, especially considering that, this is a team that's going to be at home in this one. So closing out tier 2, we have the Detroit Lions, and Detroit Lions fell on their face, in week 1. It was a tough game. They played the Packers. They go against the Bears in this one. Bears, a 47-point total in this game here for the Lions and Bears. And Lions, 34.6% pressure rate, pretty much a little bit better than average, somewhere in the middle of the league, in the middle of the pack on that pressure rate for week 1. I do think the Lions, try to rebound here and at least look better. I'm not going to say they're going to go out and smash the Bears, but after a bad game last week, I expect the Lions to, at least look more formidable than they did last week. It's against Caleb Williams. We haven't seen how Caleb Williams is going to do yet against Minnesota because, again, at the time of this recording, that game has not kicked off. But ultimately, Lions at home, rally those boys after getting kicked in the teeth against the Packers, and let's see what goes on. But I think Lions here to close out tier number 2 is fair. Moving to tier number 3, you have the Houston Texans here at 12. Houston Texans take on the Buccaneers, and 43-point total here. Texans 31.3% pressure rate. There could be points in this game, right? You're taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but again, no Tristan Wirfs. This is a defense that arguably was the best defense coming into the NFL outside of Denver. I still think it's a top 5 unit in the league, even after last week, where, look, they lost to the Rams. It wasn't the prettiest game for them. They had some issues, but we expected them to have some issues in that game. They take on the Bucks, who their offense did not look amazing last week either. And so it's a good matchup for the Texans. I expect them to get some sacks in this one. Then we move over here to the Buffalo Bills taking on the New York Jets. And the Bills, again, we talked about the Ravens, right? A really, really tough matchup. I don't want to take too much from that Bills game and sit here and tell you that, hey, this Bills defense is going to be terrible this year. It is at the Jets, though, so they are on the road in this game, 46.5% up. 46.5 point total in this game. Bills, not a ton of pressure created against Lamar Jackson this week, but it's Lamar Jackson, right? It's the Ravens, similar to what we talked about with, on the Ravens side of the ball when we talked about them earlier. I'm not giving them a pass completely, but it's just a 1 week sample size here. They take on the Jets. Justin Fields and the Jets looked much better than people expected them to. But ultimately, I think the Bills should be able to rally and get some sacks in this game, take that momentum from last week on a high where they won that game at the end. And I think they should be able to give the Jets a little bit of trouble in that matchup. Arizona Cardinals here at 14, guys. I got to be honest with you. I know a lot of people are going to be on the Arizona Cardinals because they play the Panthers, and I don't blame people. I just got to be completely honest. Last year to this year, right? Not a ton of changes for this Arizona Cardinals defense. They did draft a kid out of Notre Dame, right, at cornerback, and he looked good in his first game. But ultimately, a lot of the same pieces on this defense from last year, and they came up short again, right? And I have some frustrations here with this Cardinals defense. I can't tell you how many times we've given them out and they've fell on their face. They do play at home though. I do think it's a safe play. I don't think we're going to get a very high ceiling with them, but I think it's a safe play, right? And we'll see how that matchup goes taking on the Panthers, but they are at home there. Then you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here at 15, and I got to be honest with you, this Bucs defense looked a lot better than I expected them to. At least from a pressure standpoint, 43% pressure rate last week in Week 1 was very, very, very nice game. It's only a 43 point total in this game, which was pretty low. I think Vegas expects both of these defenses to to play good again this week. And some question marks on the offense, right? You have some issues with that offensive line, with CJ Stroud, a defense in Tampa Bay Buccaneers that were able to generate a lot of pressure last week, right? They probably can do the same against CJ Stroud and this offensive line. That's probably the worst or one of, if not the worst units in the NFL. So that's going to do it for tier 3. Moving on to tier 4, a much wider tier here. Not a ton of teams stand out to me. There are some plays here that are higher upside, but let's just go through it here. Washington Commanders here at number 16, and they take on the Packers. And the reason I had them this high is because ultimately Jordan Love, he tends to put the ball in harm's way because he is a gunslinger. He can take some sacks as well. I don't love the Commanders this week, but I wouldn't hate it if you were trying to swing some upside. Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Philadelphia Eagles there at 17. It's just a case of a really good defense. This is a team in Kansas City that can't afford to go 0-2. No Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy not going to be here. They need to bounce back and rebound at home, and I expect them to do so. So I think that they're a safer play, which sounds crazy because we're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles here. But could be completely wrong there. Then you have the Indianapolis Colts, though, at 18, going up against Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix turned the ball over 3 times last week against a defense in the Titans that not many people had very, very high in their rankings coming into the season, right? Indianapolis Colts, I do like their defense. I do like, that they have a new coordinator in Amarato coming over from Cincinnati, who had some good defenses in the past before he was let go. I like what the Colts have there. I do think ultimately Denver can rebound, but they are susceptible to making mistakes. And Sean Payton's offenses have started off really slow, to start the year, the last couple of seasons with Denver. So I could see the Indianapolis Colts giving them a little bit of trouble there and maybe being a worthwhile pick. It's a risky pick, but might have, some of the higher upside out of these guys, these teams that you see here. But then Moving on here, you look at the Chicago Bears, and this is a tough one for me because at the time of recording for this video, I haven't seen the Bears play football, and I feel confident in the Minnesota Vikings, which is why I have them as high. A lot of the same returning players, but I haven't seen this Bears team. I don't know what Bears team we're going to get, and so they take on the Detroit Lions. And look, Detroit looked pretty rough in their first game, but they're going back to home. They're going to be in a dome, and I think they'll have a chance to bounce back. But I have the Bears here at number 9 just in case maybe they don't bounce back. Then you have the Tennessee Titans here at number 20. And Tennessee Titans in this matchup here, they go against the Rams. I think their front looked pretty good. If they can get to Matt Stafford and generate some pressure there and give him some issues, I think they could be a solid play this week. I'm not in love with firing them up, but I have them at 20 because I'm saying to myself, you know what? Maybe they are a little bit better than we expected. Was it Bo Nix in Denver, or was it the Tennessee Titans just being better than people expected, right? Being a better defense this year. You have the Los Angeles Chargers here at 21. I worry a little bit about the Chargers in this matchup because they didn't look good against the run last week. They take on Ashton Genty and the Raiders in this one, and while the Raiders run offense didn't look good last week, I think they can bounce back. Raiders are playing at home, so Chargers got to go on the road in this one. But it's still a new offense in the Raiders. But Geno Smith and the Raiders looked good last week, right? Against a bad defense. I just ultimately think the Chargers defense is going to be really good this year. So that's why I have them here at 21. I couldn't put them much higher just because I think matchup wise, I don't think this is the best matchup for them. Then you have the Raiders there at 22. Raiders get to play at home against the Chargers. I think the Raiders defense looked better than people expected. I think they have a chance to be solid in this matchup. Not super excited to fire them up. New York Giants at 23. Giants take on Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. And look, the Giants didn't generate a ton of pressure, but the Cowboys did give up some pressure against the Eagles. I think they could be a solid, maybe bounce back play this week. They are going on the road though, so I don't really particularly love the matchup for the Giants either. But if that's what you got, then the talent at the front seven, you just got to hope wins out and gets you a couple of sacks to salvage the week. Number 24, the New England Patriots. And I struggle with the Patriots. They are very, very high in consensus rankings for many, many people. What I would say is, yes, they do play the Miami Dolphins, but keep in mind, they are going on the road in this game. And Christian Gonzalez may not play. And we saw Geno Smith carve up that defense in the past game for the Patriots. And look, while the Miami Dolphins didn't look good in week 1, that's putting it nicely. I do ultimately think that those pass catchers against that defense at home could bounce back after, everyone's pretty much shitting on them and doubting them after week 1. And I don't blame people. I'm doubting them too. But I do think I don't have the Patriots much higher. I can understand playing and starting the Patriots over anybody in this tier though, because if the Dolphins are what we saw in week 1, they could pay off tremendously. I do want to also share just some charts here. I'm going to be posting these on Twitter, but this is just the passing and rushing defense EPAs. And just if you take a look here, you'd see, pretty much top right is the defense that performed the best in week 1. Bottom left are the defenses that did not that pretty much performed the worst. You want to be in that top right quadrant, successfully. And then obviously, more towards the right is defenses that were, good against the pass. Right. And then higher up are the defenses that were good against the run. Denver actually performed pretty good against the run. I know we talked about how I was worried, but the Colts and Jonathan Taylor are much different than the Tennessee Titans. If you'll take a look, though, that Bucs defense continuing to be stout against the run. Their pass defense continues to struggle a little bit. So we'll see how they match up in this one. Bengals were surprising. They looked good against the Browns. I just can't put the Bengals much higher. I know people are in on the Bengals this week too, but I just didn't have them. I know they're going up against the Jaguars, but I just don't have them as a top unit this week. And then this is defensive pressure versus opponent allowed pressure, guys. Again, again, similar thing all the way to the right are defenses that generated a ton of pressure. You'll see the Seattle Seahawks were the best in the NFL in week one, followed by the Denver Broncos, and then the Washington Commanders, which if you watched last week, you're not surprised by that. And then if you also look at the opponent pressure rate allowed going up to the top, you'll see some of these offenses that had some issues as well. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let's improve on what we did last week. Let's hope that we can hit 3 of our defensive streamers inside the top 10. Thank you so much. Make sure you hit like and subscribe on the show. We got more content coming up this week, and I'll see you guys next time.